Hi guys, it's Kirsty. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about why we can't force or rush our OCD recovery. But before I go into that, I'd like to ask, please do subscribe by clicking on the subscribe button below in order to stay up to date with new videos as they're released. So this felt like an important video to do because this is something that I definitely tried to do in my OCD recovery journey. And in doing so, it was actually something that was counterproductive for me. It kept me stuck for longer. Obviously, it's very important to do the work that's involved for our recovery. OCD recovery won't just come to us. There's a lot of work involved there. And unfortunately, it takes as long as it takes. As long as you know that you're doing the work, that's the important thing. And you know that you're doing the right kind of work for you, the right kind of work that's going to get you recovered. But once we start working on our recovery and we start to make some progress, we might find ourselves starting to then try and force it or rush it. But the problem is with that is that OCD tends to kind of latch onto things that are incredibly important to us because that's how it gets our attention. And because OCD has caused us to suffer a lot previously, our recovery ends up being incredibly important to us and therefore can end up being slightly vulnerable to us getting stuck on it. And this is where we might find ourselves getting then stuck in the loop of compulsively trying to force or rush recovery. So this might look like over-researching about OCD and OCD recovery, compulsively researching. It might be desperately trying to find the right exposures for you. It might be asking your therapist or whoever you're working with, desperately scrambling for more exposures. It might be doing more exposures than maybe you'd plan to do with the person that you're working with. It might be repeating an exposure that you've done before because maybe you'd found some progress after that. So you're kind of almost compulsively trying to then use exposures, or whatever kind of cognitive work, whatever model that you're using. In my case, it was REBT, so disputing my rational beliefs. We talk about a lot on this channel. It might be constantly over disputing, spending a lot of time on it. Or before I started working with OCD recovery, when I was working with a therapist, prior to that, I was doing a lot of cognitive restructuring, which actually became incredibly compulsive for me. And I'd spend, after a very busy day at work, over an hour doing that in the evening. And obviously I was doing thought challenging rather than belief challenging, which, that is, you might have heard elsewhere that can be sometimes challenging thoughts themselves, and getting the individual thoughts can be actually quite unhelpful for OCD because it's giving the content of that individual thought a lot of attention, when actually the key is, the key is looking at it's looking at the beliefs that we hold around the thoughts that can be more helpful. In addition to that, it could also be constantly ruminating about how, what else you can be doing, to get yourself recovered, basically obsessing over it. And then you could find yourself checking, are the obsessions still there? Not because you're terrified of anymore, maybe the outcome of the obsession itself, but you're terrified of the fact that they're still there because you're terrified of still being stuck on it or never getting recovered. So your mental internal checking compulsions are more driven from the fear of OCD itself and not getting recovered, or not getting recovered fast enough, rather than because you're fearful of the original feared scenario. So for example, if you were originally suffering from relationship OCD, you were terrified of losing your partner before. Once you started working your recovery, the fear might have gone from losing your partner as much, and you're able to sit with that a bit more. But actually the fear is that I just want OCD to go now because I've had enough, and I just want to get recovered ASAP because of, I don't know, X, Y, Z, whatever. Maybe there's a big event you want it to be gone by or something like that. The problem here is that OCD knows that you want it gone, it knows that you want it rid, and it knows that you're making demands. So, if you're doing this and you're finding yourself, trying to rush or force recovery, it's maybe because you are having, maybe you're holding irrational beliefs about it. So it might be, I must have OCD gone by this point, if not, it would be awful, or I shouldn't have to still be suffering from OCD. And of course, the more strongly we hold on to these musts and should about OCD, the more we're kind of feeding into the fact that we can't accept OCD itself, and that's what can keep us latched for longer. So then the more that we are kind of doing things to force recovery or rush recovery, these compulsions that I mentioned, completely constantly researching or spending, like longer than necessary doing your cognitive work, longer than the guidelines that you've been given by the person that you're working with. And if you're choosing to work on disputing irrational beliefs based on the rational motive behavioral therapy model that we talk about on this channel, then you maybe don't want to be doing it for too much in a day, and you want to be doing it maybe at set times during the day. So you might choose to do 20 minutes twice a day, and then maybe gradually reduce that to 20 minutes once a day, and then gradually you reduce that to maybe 10 minutes once a day or 20 minutes 3 times a week. But what you don't want to be doing is trying to do your cognitive work as a response to the discomfort that you're feeling that OCD is causing. So you don't want to be thinking, oh my God, I need to do it now because I'm having a really bad OCD moment and the thoughts are hammering away. And the same applies for exposures. It's not helpful for us to do these things in response to to eliminate the immediate discomfort. Because if we're doing that, what we're saying is that we can't accept that immediate discomfort. We can't accept having OCD. We can't accept any of the things that OCD brings or anything like that. And of course, the more we're doing that, the more we're pushing it away, the more we're resisting. And the more we're resisting, obviously, the more it's going to keep bouncing back annoyingly, because that's just what OCD does. So here, what I found worked for me was a big perspective shift on OCD itself. So outside of whatever theme you have, it was the perspective shift on OCD suffering itself. That while I'm doing the things that I need to do to work on my recovery journey, continuing to work hard, but trying to avoid that becoming compulsive, it was working on disputing that I could stand having OCD in the meantime. So, I worked on my rational beliefs around OCD. So this basically looked a bit like, okay, what beliefs might I have? So for me, having a timeline on it maybe before I got engaged or something. So I must get rid of OCD, or I must get recovered before this point, otherwise it would be awful. So then I had to start disputing this and the fact that it wouldn't be that awful. Of course, I could cope with still having some OCD symptoms by this point. I had done when I'd done other big life things such as getting a dog, moving house, changing job, etc. So of course I could stand that. So, whatever irrational beliefs you might be holding, so look for the shoulds and musts that you're holding about getting better by a certain point or getting better generally. And there's plenty of videos on this channel that you can look through and watch to look at what shoulds and musts you might be holding about having OCD itself and how you can look at perspective changes there. A big part of this is unconditional life acceptance, because, this is a hand we've been dealt OCD. I've just done another video about asking, why me, and thinking about how it's so unfair and, I don't deserve it, etc. So really start to challenge yourself in these kind of beliefs, because actually it's not very helpful, and it's understandable. Of course, it's understandable because OCD causes a huge amount of suffering. But if we can start to shift these beliefs that we're holding about having OCD and not being recovered by a certain point, then it can help us to be a bit more flexible about the way we're looking at it and not upset ourselves if we have a bit of a dip in our recovery. So if we have a week when we're having a spike, not to let that hold us back for too long, not to get raging about it, not to get depressed about it or anything, but just to kind of see it as part of the recovery journey. And that does get easier the more it goes along. So the big part of, not rushing OCD recovery and not trying to force it is working on accepting having OCD itself. And this is not specific to REBT. This is not specific to this channel. Working on accepting having OCD is something that's generally helpful no matter what model you're using to get recovered. It's really important, because if you can't accept OCD and having OCD, then you're layering on other unpleasant emotions about it, and it takes you further away from being able to simply focus on OCD recovery and keep focused on it, because you're then obviously having to work on feeling really down about it or really angry about it. And, there may be other self-destructive behaviors that those feelings of depression or rage are causing you to do, when actually what you really want to focus on is cutting down and cutting out the compulsions. So I hope this video has been helpful for you. Thank you very much for watching, and do take care. Bye.